Welcome, everybody. This is John Arnold, and I am the chair of the Future of Work Expo event coming up in February at Fort Lauderdale, which is going to be part of the IT Expo experience, which has been going for a very long time. And if you don't know, I'm doing a series of videos to just kind of create a bit of a lead up to the event to talk about what's going to be happening, what to expect, and I'll have a different guest with me each segment. So I previously have recorded segments with TMC, Mr. TMC, Rich Tarani, and Editor-in-Chief Eric Linask. And you can find those videos on TMC has a YouTube channel, and we're going to feature our Future of Work video segments on that channel. And then over the next few weeks, I'll have other interviews with guests who are going to be speakers at the event and talking a bit about what they're looking at in this space. And today, our focus is a very familiar face, Mr. Chris Fine, integrative tech, amongst other things. So why don't you just say hello and introduce yourself to the audience, please?
Well, hi, John. Hi, everyone. Thanks for having me on today. I'm Chris Fine. I'm an independent consultant and strategist, and my focus with my clients is topic like future of work, workplace technology, security, IoT, smart buildings, sort of that interesting combination of things. And I've been doing this in this form for about 10 years. Most of my background was in financial services, IT, and technology, various aspects of that world. So I've kind of been on both sides of the table.
Great. And if you don't know, Chris should be a familiar face and probably even more importantly, voice as my partner for our long-running podcast, Watch This Space. So it's the
Yes,
John and Chris show, and we're going strong heading into season 8, huh?
absolutely. We're still just on audio. We haven't made that, I guess, that transition people sometimes do where they put out a YouTube as well or whatever. But yes, it's great every month. Would urge everyone to listen to get John's wisdom and whatever I can offer on future of work. But we've covered a lot of topics, right?
We sure have. And it's not surprisingly, that podcast, of course, ties nicely to this event because our podcast themes are largely built around future of work issues. And gosh, we've been talking about hybrid work for a while now, Chris, and it's a big messy puzzle, right?
Yes, I think so, John. Although I think it's solidifying a little bit. I guess we're coming into our fourth year, really past the height of the pandemic, when the great shock of fully remote work happened, and it seems as though it's kind of reaching a status quo, which seems to be 2, 3 days a week for most types of positions. And we always make sure to mention that there's a whole lot of positions and types of industries where they have to come in. They're more frontline folks. So we're talking about more the folks who are what once was called knowledge workers. And so typically they sort of have a choice of where they do the job in terms of being able to accomplish it. And but for the large sort of knowledge worker population, it does seem as though we're stabilizing for a lot of organizations on sort of 2, 3 days a week. And that's what the research shows as well. And I know what you're going to talk a lot about this at Future of Work, right?
Yes, yes. So we've been, talking about many variations on hybrid work over the, as you say, past few years on the podcast, and we will explore that as we have been in recent events at Future Work Expo. So yes, if you are wondering about what hybrid is all about and where it's going and what you should be doing, probably more importantly, yes, we'll be covering that ground pretty well. So when we Chris, when we talk about future of work, we've been using this term for a long time. And of course, the future has to come at some point. And it's largely here, I would say. I think the big change from last year would just be how dominant AI has become as kind of an everything, anything application. And it's certainly having a big impact on what we call work today. And I'm sure that concept is going to evolve quite a bit over the next few years.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I think it is going to be dominant, John. I agree with you. And I think you've done a lot of great coverage on the AI's influence, for example, on contact centers, customer support, and other areas. And I know you do a lot of writing and analytics about that. I also think it's just made the transition to being something that people use on a day-to-day basis. Right. And in a lot of different jobs, like I need to write something. And how often does that happen to most of us on the job? I need to do a spreadsheet. I need to write a document. And it's becoming pretty standard to call up some form of generative AI to help you do that. And that maybe that sounds a little bit mundane, but when you think about the amount of time that's spent in that type of work, it's pretty transformative. Sometimes I think of it as being the next generation and thus even more powerful of an impact of what things like, Word, Excel, PowerPoint had on the last generation of productivity, along with the last generation of collaborative technology that's morphed into the current generation of Zoom and Teams and WebEx, et cetera, et cetera, that's just accomplished so much in this area. So my feeling is, and I'd be interested what you think, is that AI is going to be, it is already happening, is the next giant toolbox for this type of stuff.
Yeah, and I think one of the vectors that we have to think about this would be our demographics. We're a multi-generational workforce. The digital natives, so the younger generation in the workforce now, for them, digital work is kind of the reality. It's what they expect, and they don't have a lot of the perspective from older generations that we do. And if you don't know, folks, that's also kind of the vibe of our podcast, Watch This Space, that Chris and I are definitely from the analog world. And that doesn't mean we can't adapt to the new technologies because we've been doing this a very long time. But we try to, yeah, impose, that's probably a good word, impose, but also impart our analog perspectives on what these digital technologies, kind of the implications of what they mean. And I know, folks, yes, you've been listening and watching Chris speak the past few minutes, but I know what you're really doing is checking out that background there. And that's not a virtual background. Those are analog artifacts, folks, and most of them probably still work, right, Chris?
Yes, most of them do. In fact, you can see some of them working. That's my retro tech museum. I've been collecting this type of stuff for a long time. So you can see things like an original Tandy 102 computer, which was really the first portable computer, or its predecessor, the TRS-80 Model 100 was the first portable computer. I've got one of the first HP, it's not really pocket, but calculator computers, an HP 75, and some various types of clocks back there, and my collection of glass insulators from telephone poles, and a vintage radio and vintage meters. So I've been collecting this type of stuff for a long time. I enjoy it. So I thought with the advent of doing a lot of calls like this and video like this at home, it made sense to put something in the background. And that was compounded by the fact that for some reason my computer's old enough that Zoom doesn't really like to put a synthetic background. Otherwise, I would have your future of work background. So I kind of had to compensate. So that's kind of how the story comes back in a circle.
Well, don't worry, folks. The future work is probably not going to look like your retro wall. However, you know what? The things we do in the workplace really haven't changed a whole lot, right? I mean, we're just going to do things differently. So everything that you're looking at back there, folks, has and had definitely had utility. And they did specific things and they did them very well. And today we're just going to be using different tools to, in a lot of ways, do the same kind of things we always did. If when we just talk about what work, quote unquote, means, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I have a couple of modern displays back there, to your point. They're actually quite useful. One is a map of the New York City subway system that shows all the trains moving around as dotted lights. And then I have sort of a general purpose display that I have things like airport delays and the current Dow Jones index and various things cycling through the weather. So it's always good to display information, and that's kind of the theme here. But I do think, to your point about work, that uh, I think the content of many types of positions hasn't really evolved, and perhaps the management thinking as well in a lot of places, which is why you see things like return to work mandates that aren't always that successful. So I think that the kind of that tension and working that out is going to be a pretty key theme for the next period of time, don't you?
Yes, yes. The divide between workers and management will always be, you know, a focus for this stuff, like who's going to control it. The pendulum has definitely swung both ways, going the workers' way early on with the pandemic and working from home, and now it's swinging the other way. They want everybody back, and I don't think anyone, very few are going back full time. So yeah, that happy middle is really, I think, as you say, the balance that we're striving for. So, maybe the roles in many of our jobs haven't really changed a whole lot. But one thing, if I want to communicate something that's important about this event is when we talk about future work, we really are defining it through the prism of technology, right? So this event hasn't really been about, soft skills, HR related issues. It's important, yes, but we are in the technology business, primarily all of us,
Right,
at
right.
IT Expo, and most of us come out of the telecoms world. So that's how we think. We look at communications and technologies. So we are framing most of our content around the impact of these technologies. So, if we just pause for a second and say, okay, well, what are we doing at the event? Well, just from the top down, folks, we're going to start with our overview of what we're seeing in the market. So Chris and I have been, we talk about this on the podcast regularly, and we follow quite a bit of the, industry and academic research out there. And Leesman has been one of our go-tos for many years, and we'll provide some updates on some of the research there. And maybe say a bit about what makes that particular research so special.
Well, the interesting thing about Leesman, and they're not the only one out there that does this, but they've been doing it for a very long time, is that their work, their research, first of all, has an enormous amount of data points in it going back a long time. It's essentially a very sophisticated form of worker satisfaction survey, right? And that translates into workplace satisfaction. And so they've asked literally over 1 million people over a period of years about many different aspects of how they feel about their workplace. And one important axis of that is technology. But it also covers the way the workplace is laid out, their work habits, their schedule of work. And so if you look at that database and the presentations they make every quarter, it tends to be very holistic. And I think that if you're going to look at research in this area, and again, it's not only them, and it's more and more of the well-known research places, Gartner, Forrester, et cetera, and as well as more in different types of industries like architecture, furnishings, construction, real estate, are really producing excellent research on this overall topic. But it's about the holistic issue of the evolution of work in the workplace. And to your point about technology, technology exists in an environment. And so one trend you're really seeing is offices getting refit out and companies moving to newer buildings, for example, that are laid out differently than the old kind of big room with bright lights and tables or cubicles. And the new spaces have more ambiance to them, and look like a place you want to go rather than a place you have to go. And so that it seems like that's a big trend too, and technology is a key part of that. Everything from AV to lighting to environmental controls to green and sustainability issues, health and wellness issues, um, and the networking so that you can go anywhere and do anything you need to do. So there's a lot of different dimensions to it, and I think when you talk at the program, um, figure that this is all starting to come together a little bit, uh,
Hmm.
right? Because it's been enough time since the big disruption to start to see some of this coming together, and there's going to be winners and losers in all of this, right?
Yeah, yeah. And it from our perspective, and I think for most people out there, every business today seems to be really a technology business. And everything's trying to be, every solution that comes to market has some technology component to it. So over the course of our program, we're going to look at some of those various technologies. And
Sure.
it's very easy when you come out of the communications world to think, oh, well, future work, well, it's just going to be done in Microsoft Teams and Cisco WebEx and Zoom, and that's kind of it. Well, that's one building block, that's one part of it. But as you say, that holistic idea touches every, link in the chain of an organization. So, we talk about things like, cybersecurity, why IT has to evolve because now, especially with AI and of course mobility, there's new data streams coming that we never had before. So the variety of streams and the volume of data streams uh, creates a much bigger challenge for IT in terms of keeping it all safe and secure, and of course managing it, making sense of it, and letting the organization have the getting the benefit of having that data. That requires a lot of different capabilities than just simply keeping the IT lights on in the organization, right?
Yes, and I think you make a good point, which is like everybody's more and more of a team, or needs to be, right? Again, that sort of holistic, right? That, for example, about threats, that's everything from the physical space to cyber intrusion, to identity, for example. And there's all kinds of technology in there. So I think that the work approach of the future, or the management and risk management approach of the future, has to tie it all in, don't you think?
Yeah, yeah. It's not just you show up to work or sit at your desk and work anymore. As you say, we're all connected to everybody else. And that's yeah, I think that's one of the byproducts of this term we've had for a long time called digital transformation. And again, it's shifting from the analog world to the digital, and that just creates data points around everything and connecting everything. And now with AI, and as we're really just beginning to see where this is taking things, but not only are we all connected to everything, but we're also connecting not just people to people, but also machines to people and machines to machines. And that's where a lot of this AI stuff is going to really transform the workplace. So one of the big terms we're going to see in 2025 is called agentic AI. And we'll touch on that a little bit during our event. And it's this idea that AI agents can be autonomous and do end-to-end tasks without human intervention. Now, this is AI kind of taken to another level, and we're going to see it in the contact center, yes, in the world of customer service, but we're also going to see it in the workplace, where in effect, Chris, I think every worker can have their own kind of personal digital assistant that can do a lot of tasks for them and even show up at meetings on their behalf, take notes, report back. This level of automation is very new, very kind of, I wouldn't say unproven, but this is a whole new frontier for how work is being transformed by AI and of course technology in general. And that's the future of work I think that's the lane we're trying to swim in, I think, with this event, right?
Sure. Well, it sounds fascinating. What are some of the technologies, John, that you're going to talk about? And by the way, I have to say, on as a compliment to you, I think you've really been ahead of this AI trend for quite some time. Before the explosion of the last year or two, you were talking about it. You've been involved with many companies that have been on the forefront of this in your space. And I do believe you've been correctly predicting for quite some time how big a thing this was going to be when, some folks are, myself included, was a little skeptic about how quickly it would grow and how much impact it would actually have. Um, but my compliments on that. So for folks who might attend this, I think you're going to learn a whole lot of interesting stuff from Jon and his curated content. But in that spirit, what are some of the highlights you'd want to say about what you're doing?
Yeah, well, thank you. And so on that front, stuff that we've been looking at for a long time, it's just there are different iterations of the same communications tools we've all been using for forever, right?
Right,
And so in terms of the technologies I mentioned earlier about, Teams and Zoom, etc., yes, the collaboration platforms are still going to be very central. As you mentioned earlier, we're in a much more collaborative world now, especially with everybody, but many people working remotely in decentralized, configurations. Those tools are essential for people to work together and bring out the best of their, collective capabilities. So there's going to be a lot of looking at that. We're going to be looking a bit at the contact center to understand the, impact of all these tools on CX, customer experience, and also how these technologies are not just affecting us as workers, but organizations structurally. How are they going to adapt to AI? Because it's going to transform the nature of the whole workplace. And also the tools, like the management tools and ideas you're going to need to bring all this together. Because there hasn't really been an integrated strategy from management about managing AI. So that's kind of a new set of challenges that we're going to have to deal with. We're also going to look at, as you mentioned earlier, Chris, about corporate real estate, the physical environment that we work in. How are those spaces evolving? What kind of tools are we going to need to kind of not just configure them, but what kind of endpoints are we going to be using? And how these space is going to function, right? Because the AI, as you mentioned, can do things like it can detect, ambient temperature. You can have heat maps in rooms to show the occupancy trends. So there's a lot. Everything is about data, right? Everything is driven by the data that is in the environment. We can't see it, we can't touch it, but AI is tracking all of it. So
right,
yeah,
right. I mean, it's a very fundamental, if you think about it, Jon, it's a fundamentally different work paradigm with in terms of physical space when people aren't there all the time. That's just the fact that people would be there 5 days a week, except for, certain positions where there's a lot of traveling, in most cases, was just such an underlying assumption for the past 100 plus years, right?
yeah.
That that when you really start changing that, you have to think about a lot of different things. And even in terms of just to take one mundane thing, which is related to what you're saying, like how do you service and clean a building where you don't have people in every day? How do you keep it secure when you may not always have everybody around you to take note of something that's unusual, you know?
Yeah.
And how do you optimize when people are going to show up? I mean, that's actually that timing is one of the biggest, and scheduling conundrum is one of the biggest problems right now. Is like, well, when should people show up?
Mhm.
Right? Because if I downsize my real estate, for example, to support a 2 point something day a week work day on average, then I have to accommodate peaks. So I either have to smooth that out or figure out something or have some kind of spillover space or just tell people not to come in. And how do you even know what's going to happen before it happens? And if there's some day when everybody shows up, but like, how do you manage all of this? So if I'm the facilities manager, or the head of HR and I want people's work quality to be good, or I'm the CFO and I want to, keep a control on costs or whatever the dimension is, this is pretty transformative. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that's what I hear being related to a lot of your coverage in the program.
Well, so without going overboard on AI, because we kind of have to, you know,
Yeah, we
we
can't just talk about it. Yeah.
right. But there are, of course, guardrails we have to talk about. This is a bit of a Wild West right now, so there's definitely a lot of concerns. But a lot of what you were getting at there too, Chris, is yes, there are kind of new benefits that AI can deliver in terms of its predictive capabilities to help
Right, right,
optimize resource allocation.
right.
Absolutely. And this topic just kind of the rings get more concentric, right?
More and more levels to it. Yeah.
Filling out. So with that, I think we're going to call it time on our chat here. But I will say to people, if you've never been to the IT Expo, definitely worth checking out. And it's going to be in Fort Lauderdale, February 11th to 13th, 2025. And our programming runs on the Wednesday and Thursday, which are the first 2 days of programs. And the third day is going to be mostly on the show floor. And we will also have some content running there in what's called the Solution Showcase Theater. So there'll be lots of places to find us. And of course, if you come, we want to see you in every session. But yes, take time to explore the other sessions in the IT Expo and the keynotes, etc. The overall experience is pretty cool, and we're just a small part of it, but we want to see you there. All right, so Chris,
Great.
yeah, last comment before we head out.
Well, it should be a great program, John. Congrats on putting it together. And I'm sure if folks want to come attend your sessions, you're right, there is a bigger ecosystem there, which is quite interesting. And people should, I would certainly recommend spending a little time trolling around and keeping, looking at what's there. But if you follow John's program, I think it'll be informative and great to do. So, John, looking forward to it.
Okay, me too, Chris, as always.
All
Okay,
right.
so with that, we'll sign off by saying if you want to get to the show, you can just check out certainly the TMC home site, which is tmcnet.com. Our event is futureofwork.com. No, sorry, futureofworkexpo.com. And kind of joined at the hip would be our podcast that Chris and I have been doing a long time, www.watchthisSpace.tech. And you can check me out well, just look me up, jarnoldassociates.com. Lots to look at there related to all of these things. Okay, so again, Chris, thanks again, and thank you all for watching. This is John Arnold for the Future of Work Expo, and we'll be back with another video segment very soon, and we hope to see you at the show. Thanks
Thanks,
all.
John. Thanks, everyone.